welcome everybody to our guided tour through Joel Babb's Maine, or actually an artist talk by Joel Babb, but you know, I think it's an idea for a PBS show.
Good,
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. For the people watching online, and just so everybody here knows, we always stream our talks live on Facebook, and if you're watching online, you can ask Joel questions by just typing them into the comments. But there's a little bit of a delay, so I'd encourage you to type them when you have them, because if you wait till the end, we may not see them because of the delay. And also, if you ever miss a talk, you can watch the recorded version of the live stream on our Facebook page, or we also post a cleaned up version on our YouTube channel. So now, before I turn it over to Joel, just a little bit about Joel. Joel Babb graduated in art history from Princeton, then spent a year in Munich and Rome before going to Boston to get an MFA from the Museum School in Tufts. And there, and this may be surprising and worth a question or two, his style changed from abstraction to contemporary realism. Joel has been in shows at the National Academy in New York City, CMCA, the Portland Museum of Art, the Algonquin Museum of American Art, the Arnault Art Museum, and the Naples Museum of Art. His work is in the permanent collections of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Portland Museum of Art, the Farnsworth Art Museum, and the Fogg Museum, as well as in numerous other collections, such as both the Harvard Business and Medical Schools. And stay tuned, because we're going to have an exciting announcement about Joel's work. Hopefully not too long from now.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Are you making it tonight?
Well, I didn't think I could. But
No, you're not supposed to.
No, I'm not.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you know, it was really a come down to be a graduate in art history from Princeton, and then realize that I didn't know anything about painting. But I had gone to Rome, and I was washing dishes for several months for some German nuns, and then I determined to see everything there was to see in Rome, and I really went to every church and saw all the paintings in the palaces and things, and then I saw the Sistine Chapel. And you know, after that, I said, you know, I could see other things like famous illusionistic ceiling paintings, and said, you know, these artists really knew what they were doing, and there's a whole lot that I need to learn. And so, I came and I got into the MFA program in Boston because George Siegel, who was a very, you know, highly famous sculptor in those days, you know, wrote me a letter of recommendation. And so I had, you know, he was one of the teachers who was at Princeton as an artist in residence, and so he was very encouraging. And so it was a period when I think, okay, I'm going to go to the museum school, and because they have a conservative sort of program there where they'll teach you classic method. Well, when I got there, I realized all those people who painted with burnt umber had left, and that the school had been radicalized. So I sort of had to figure out what to do myself. But fortunately, I got a job as a night watchman in the Museum of Fine Arts, and supported myself that way for a while. And what a fantastic thing, because there were only 3 of us in the museum all night, and so it was just a matter of walking around the galleries looking at art all night. And I still have a bunch of sketchbooks that I kept at the time. But so anyway, the transition to realism just took over, and it never went back. And I did a lot of paintings of cityscapes in the beginning, and that was how I got to be known. But you know, when I was doing these works, I had you know, discovered things in Maine, and in Boston I'd been using a large format camera, 4x5 camera, to take pictures of architecture, and especially from tall buildings, and even occasionally flying around in a helicopter taking photographs, because I love the aerial perspectives, like one of them is out in the other gallery, and that large format photography would enable me to do really panoramic scenes and have consistent perspectives. So the I used that large format camera up here in the woods of Maine to do things like brooks and paths in the woods and things to take. And it was very difficult to learn to photograph well in the woods because there's such a, it had to take one exposure for the shadows and one exposure for the light areas in order to get a comprehensive enough image that I could paint from. So it was quite a come down. But while I was working on these stream paintings, I came across the lines that I wrote in an artist statement about this show. And it was a book titled Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. That's right. I love the book. I won't tell you anything about the book, but it said, the part that struck me is when it says, it seemed to me sometimes as though the Lord breathes on this poor gray ember of creation and turns it to radiance for a moment or a year or the span of a life. And then it sinks back into itself again. And to look at it, no one would know it had anything to do with fire or light. So whenever you turn your eyes, the world can shine like transfiguration. You don't have to bring a single thing to it except a little willingness to see. Only who could have the courage to see it? So that is, I found that really striking, because last fall, not now, but last year when I was taking a lot of photographs for this painting, these woods were just so incredibly beautiful. There was enough water in the streams. And it was almost hallucinatory. It'd spend the whole day up there, and you have to bushwhack back into this particular brook that I love. And I didn't see a single soul that whole time I was up there photographing, just me and the dog all day. Like go a little farther and take a series of photographs. But the word transfiguration that's a very big word. I mean, and there's a lot to say about that, but I won't say what it means to me particularly. But there is something that, I think of realism and a realist art as something that is when you rightly observe a very small corner of the universe in order to see universal principles in action. And that's, there was an Austrian writer named Adalbert Stifter who was criticized for writing about characters that were just peasants and not important people, and the incidents in them were not great things like, battles of Napoleon and with characters like that. So he wrote this thing called he had a series of stories called Bunte Steine, colored stones, and they were about peasants and just a series of stories and things. But he wrote a defense of that by saying, he used the example of a pot of milk boiling over on a stove shows the same forces that cause a volcanic eruption. So you see, you think about it, he says, these forces that you can see every day just around, like in a brook or just observing, those are things that they are more important because they're happening everywhere all the time, and it's not like when Krakatoa blows up and there's a huge event, but these are things that are going on all of the time. So that is really what I think about realism in art, just focusing on what's in front of you, but in a way that you have sort of a universal perspective of how it is important. So,
And the name of that Austrian poet again was what?
the name of the author?
Yeah.
Adalbert Stifter. Yeah, he's an Austrian writer. I went back to see the brook. It was, as I said, it was just hallucinatory, the beauty of it, and there was enough water in the streams to make them interesting. So I went back this week to see that area that I had painted, and I was wondering, if it would be like not as interesting, not as beautiful or transcendent or transfiguring as it was. And well, I'm not going to tell you what it was because I wouldn't want to disappoint you. But I could say the hills were greater, and I was tramping up with my dog, and it was like both of us were so exhausted by the time we got home that I've often find, I paint a place, and as you start painting something, you're working on it, and then usually by the end of the day, you look over there and you say, "Oh my God, I should have painted that. What was I thinking?" Or you paint something, and it just seems utterly, unbelievably beautiful. It's just so fantastic, And then you go back a week or two or a month or the next year, and you look at it and you say, "What was I thinking?" It's just there is absolutely nothing here, and it's the same way with photographs too. Like some of the photographs I take of my best paintings, like there was one that is down at Harvard Business School, which is an 8-foot tall painting that I imagine this will be like a door, and in the foreground, you'll hang this so that the bottom of the painting is very low down, and the top of the thing, will be the size of a door, and that a person looking at it will feel they could just step right into it. The weeds and things, the stones and things in the foreground are going to be life-size, so they'll be trompe-l'oeil in a way, so that the illusion will be that you could move into the space and then walk up. And in the foreground will be a microcosm, and in the background, macrocosm, the great universe beyond. And so part of what I love about painting is being able to transition from the near and intimate, and then go off into the vast distance and go from one order of magnitude to another. That is something that it was just unthinkable in terms of my abstract painting. They were just there. But often when I look at my photographs, the photographs that I worked from for the Hounds of Spring, they were transparencies, 4x5 transparencies, and I think, this is so dull, it's so boring, how it could be. So something happens when you're working on a painting that you invest. I don't know. I mean, I think you invest imagination, or you get into it in a very different way. So, the Lord breathes on this poor gray ember of creation and turns it to radiance. I just love that phrase. The 3 paintings that are on view here of the view from Eagle's Nest. This one here, you can't see, but there's 2 over there. We stayed a week in this house at Biddeford Pool, and it had a porch that looked out on that. And so I did three paintings from the porch. One was on a rainy day, and then one was when the weather was clearing, and one was a bright sunny day like this. And then all the time we spent a lot of time sitting on that porch, I took photographs too. Late in the day, I would never have had time to paint that scene when it's almost getting on towards twilight, and suddenly there was a rainbow underneath the clouds. So, totally unpredictable kind of thing. But I recognize, the same group of rocks in the foreground in all 3 paintings. And so I think it would be interesting to have them hanging right together so that you would go from one to the other. So you can see that there's something about light that utterly transforms a scene as it changes. You begin to understand exactly why Monet got so interested in painting whole series of cathedrals or poplars and other things like that. That is something. Monet, over the years, when I first went to Boston, there were paintings by Monet, and then there were a lot of other old masters. And the Monets, I never really thought very much about him, but he's become one of my great heroes. He's very fantastic. These 3 paintings here were painted in my studio, but what I have is, I'll have, say, my computer screen set up on a thing that's at eye level, and then I'll have my canvas over here. And so I can just look over there and I say, okay, these I'm going to just start painting as if I were outside. You know, no meticulous underdrawing, just sort of painting away. And I do a sort of underpainting anyway when I'm painting outside. And so in a way, I think one of the things I want to express in this talk is that you can't just paint from photography. You can't just paint plein air because you want to do bigger things than you could do plein air. You know, you have to also somehow paint from imagination, and somehow you have to keep all those things going at the same time because they feed each other. You know, they're all important, and so then, yeah, so even though these are studio paintings, and I've done some very large pieces that way, as if I were outside, you know, but I have a nice screen that I can look at and just paint as if I were outside. So I have to be, you know, it has to be very current. It has to be I have to, you know, have done it recently in order to be able to transition back to that. And the paintings that are in the garden, this painting of the garden, and also the house over there, and the one, is it around there? Yes. Those are actually fully plein air, you know. And out there are some other plein air studies that I've done that relate to more finished studio pieces. So that was quite interesting. I want to show you some slides that relate to that. But first I wanted to show you this, because when I came back to Boston and I was really struggling to learn to paint in a traditional sort of classical manner, I really had a hard time, you know, just figuring out, okay, how do you do an underpainting in oils? Or do you do an underpainting? Do you need one? I mean, I tried everything. Painting on a white canvas, painting on a toned ground, or whatever. But it was when I started to study some Rembrandt sketches and other Dutch paintings from the Baroque era, I see it becomes very clear what you do. And there were some good teachers at the museum school. There was one who did a course called Technical Painting, where you ground your own colors if you wanted to. You know, we did a little egg tempera. We did a fresco. You know, so I got to try all those things. And he had us learn a technique of sort of based on Venetian painting, where you start on a canvas that has a toned ground. It's a sort of a brown. And in this painting by Rembrandt, you can see in certain areas here where the paint is very thin, you know, you can see that reddish brown of the original tone of the canvas. And then you can make some things darker than that tone, and then you can build other things up by steps. How many steps up do you come from the middle tone to establish a particular light? And like in this case, see, this is where the lightest light is right there, you know. So this is like a couple of steps up from that tone of the ground. And it's like the kind of drawing where you start on a piece of colored paper and then you work with white and black chalk to, you know, to create things that are lighter than the tone. And Rembrandt always tries to incorporate some of that undertone showing through the atmospherics. So you always feel that you're looking into those clouds, and you're seeing something behind it, something through it. You know, there's a depth, the illusion of depth. So what blows my mind about this is that there's very little color. You know, it's almost monochromatic. It's like, it's all about light and what the light is doing, and what the light is revealing, and what the light is concealing, you know, because things down in here get lost in the shadows. So the light really reveals a lot in some places and not in others. It's so amazingly evocative and imaginative, and I'm sure it was, maybe he did some drawings or sketches of landscape, you know, but he had enough experience doing that he could invent this out of his head. And so for quite a while I invented I only painted landscapes I invented out of my head in a monochrome style like this, and that was a great period. But this painting, these were, these Monets sort of blew my mind because the MFA had a lot of them, and they had some very important ones. And, it was like they're so good, but they're so far beyond what I was capable even of understanding. I'm sure if I attempted something like that, it would come out looking like a German expressionist something, because I simply didn't understand it. But what is so amazing to me is that both of these are about light, what the light is revealing and what it's concealing. And the sense of space and atmosphere in both of them are just incredible. So how can they both be about light to such an extreme extent and be so dissimilar, So I'm tempted to think that, well, once you know that the human eye has rods and cones, the rods are what you use when the light's very low. The rods are what do lights and darks. You see lights and darks primarily with the rods. And with the cones, you see colors. And then, so I also thought, well, there must be 3 types of cone receptors in the eye. It comes out, red, blue, and yellow. Well, that's not true, but there are 3 types of cone receptors in the eye. And so it all began to seem very simple to me, But I did see some articles about that neurobiologists wrote about color and how the eye sees and how the brain processes stuff that made me realize that what we were teaching about color at the museum school was all wrong, really. It was just kindergarten stuff compared to what actually goes on in perception. So. Yeah, those are both fantastic. Now, let me.
Could you please comment on your painting?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I realize I was getting on about color and perception too much, but I've got a couple of things here. I'm just going to leave that there for now. All right. This, of course, is that painting over there in a stage of when I had just finished doing an underpainting. And you can see I had that kind of a reddish-brown tone underneath. And then there's some things I made lighter and some things darker. So actually that's a good size painting. So I didn't start on it, just wailing away like I would with a plein air painting. But you can, I really learned this from that Rembrandt phase in my career, having a middle tone coming up and going down. And I have another. Leave that there kind of thing. These compositions for these large paintings are actually, taken with a 35 millimeter camera, but I would take one here, and maybe some over there, and then merge them all in Photoshop. So there's an incredible amount of detail in them. And then what I do is I divide the whole canvas into 5-inch squares, and then I have, I make the Photoshop image that I'm painting from to be the same size as the canvas and divide that into 5-inch squares too. And so I'm able to draw, like this would be a 5-inch square here. And then I'm able to see just where this line cuts in, where it crosses there. So that's just like the old masters used to do a drawing of a composition with a number of figures, and then they would grid it off and then blow up the grid on the wall or wherever they were going to do it to enlarge it. So to me, it's a nice thing halfway between working precisely from a photograph. You're still drawing, you're not just copying, you're still drawing and figuring out where the lights and darks are going to be. And so I thought, yeah, this is that area down at the bottom there. And if in an area you need more detail, you can simply divide it in half again and you get smaller squares to work with. So other areas you don't need to subdivide like that. All right, now I wanted you to see these. I don't know if it will make much sense here, but I painted these pictures on several days each. Several days each. Pardon? Oh, yeah. Thanks, Roy.
While we're just taking a second, let me just adjust your mic a little. Okay. It's rubbing a little bit, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Fall off?
No, I just want to, it was rubbing against your shirt since we had it.
Oh.
The opportunity.
Thank you. Anyway, I didn't use photography at all for painting these. I just, tried to get the drawing as correct as I could and paint the color. And then I did photograph the scene, as it appeared when I was done. And so when I began to look at them, I would look at this on my computer screen and that, and I said, oh my God, there's a huge difference between the sort of the vibrancy of the color and the balance and so forth. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but as things in photography tend to fall off to black, and they go, I guess it's a reciprocity failure or something, but you never seem to see things exactly that way, because when you look into shadows, you still see color. There's a lot of interesting color down in the shadows. It's far less intense, but I think it's fascinating. It's another one of those things that makes me think painting is one way that you can actually see how the light reacts to strong light, how the eye reacts to strong light. And then it was also interesting that this came out so different in the photograph than it does there. So even when you're painting, what you see, you're sort of translating somehow into the language of painting. But
So is this what you were alluding to? You said plein air plus imagination? Or earlier you used that phrase.
yes, I think so. I think it's something, especially in the Monet, that we know that was probably all painted outside mostly, but still you can't find a sort of one-to-one correspondence between what a photograph would show. There is, so I think it's imagination. Yeah, I noticed particularly, that shadow will just look quite blue to me when I was painting it, and I think, wow, that really wonder why, But I hope it's not just narcissism, but I like my colors better than they came out in the photograph. But I was also kind of amazed that, well, the drawing was pretty correct. I was really trying to think. But my point is that when you're painting, when you're a realist, you're not just mechanically transcribing something. I mean, if you're painting from a photograph, you sort of take this and mix exactly that, and take this and mix exactly that. But when you're painting outside, there's something that's 100 times more brilliant with something that's, 100 times less so, and so you're actually rendering your perceptions, and it's very interesting how that process occurs. So the last time I was at the MFA, I got obsessed with this particular painting by Monet and its detail. You can't photograph the painting and get it to come out in a print exactly the way it is, but It's like, it's almost a scene in which there's nothing in there except some weeds and a little glimpse. But this is one of my favorite paintings by Monet. And I think, you know, his very late paintings that are almost like abstractions, you know, some of the water lilies, and they're incredible in a way that has a great sense of humility of actually looking and seeing what's there, and in terms of this new way of thinking about color. That's not brown and not black. But you can see you know, there are some very noticeable pinks in the clouds when you're looking at it, and a purpley gray under here. And that particular pink, you know, is like, because the cloud has no color of its own, it's white. You know, what it demonstrates is the color of the light, which is on a yellow hue, and in the shadows, the complement of that color in terms of light, which would be ultramarine violet. In terms of, there is a whole new awareness about light and human perception in 19th century French theory, because the physicists had made all these discoveries, and people like Ogden Rood published a book called it's slipped my mind, Modern Chromatics, where he actually spun colors on wheels, and he determined that if you had a ultramarine blue half of a disc and a brilliant yellow half of a disc, and you spun those two, they turned out perfectly gray, because the yellow and blue violet are complements in light. You know, the additive color wheel and all that, we're not going to get into today. But it's fascinating, you know, people discovered simultaneous and successive contrast that Chevreul, the guy who published that, so that, you know, when you stare at if you stare at a blue, bright blue image on a wall and turn your eye over to the side, you'll see a yellow after image and things. See, so all of these things were in the air at the time Monet painted this, and so I think, yeah, I can see this color, you know, come through here. But even in the shadows of the green trees, you see there's an incredible spectrum of color. He's painting a spectrum of greens, not just a green color with a shadow added, but a whole spectrum of related greens. And so you know, as your eye goes around, there's this incredible harmony among all things that have different local colors in that painting. That was just a recent trip to the museum, to the Monets. And now this is kind of interesting. I had this brilliant idea for a class one time, and I ended up teaching this course for Harvard Extension for 16 years in a little studio in the museum. And so we could, you know, we can go down and look at paintings, and then we go up to our little studio and do some painting. But my idea was to compare Leonardo to Seurat. And these are two guys who, you know, who painted what they saw and who developed ways for capturing their observations and stuff. But they ended up painting things that are so unbelievably different. So I wondered, you hear about artists that you know, what the artists do somehow conditions society to see things the way they saw them. And does that mean they actually saw things differently? And was the raw material of their vision different from one period to another? You know, an art historian can look at a painting and tell, oh, that's done in the 18th century, you know, or they can look, you know, that's definitely a 17th century painting, you know, and they can even tell you where it was done. So were people actually seeing things differently, or were they just following different conventions of art like that? So the real convention, Leonardo made wonderful discoveries, about light and shade, and he studied how light falls on a sphere. And he did many, many studies in his notebooks of that, and you can really see how these things are totally in the round. They're not flat like early Florentine things, which have beautiful outlines and they're correctly drawn, but they're relatively flat, and the shadows die away the way they do in a photograph. Each color, all the different local colors all go to the black. They all lose intensity and they all die in the shadows like that. So he's a great innovator, and he says I think he writes that the highest goal of the artist should be to create his figures with the sense of the complete and total roundness. That you have them in the round in a sculptural sense. And this is different. These are like a grainy screen through which things are being observed there, and there's sort of local color. The difference between that and that is due to local color, not due to light and shade. It's not. He's the inventor of chiaroscuro, and 100 years later, Rembrandt would be painting fantastic things with that chiaroscuro, the light and shade. So when this first appeared, of course, the critics said, Monsieur Seurat has done a peculiar painting of a woman covered with little colored fleas. And so he was not sort of getting the idea, not reading the conventions for what. But his painting is so fantastic. Now, later in his career, he sort of goes off and he becomes more interested in the idea of abstraction. But this and some of his early paintings, they are really like an impressionist looking at a subject and painting what he sees. But later, he does scenes that lines that go up at such an angle, of a shape, they should be red or yellow because those are, they're going up and they're cheerful colors. And so he's really one of the founders of abstraction. And all right, so that's the question. Did they really see the same? Here's there's a wonderful book about this if you're interested by an art historian named William Innes Homer called Seurat and the Science of Painting. I learned so much from that book about Seurat. But this system takes into account the colors of objects, the local color, and the color of the light. And so if you're painting a tree, you would have the local color, and then you would have the local color darker, and then you would have the complement, the optical complement of the local color. So if the tree is light green and dark green, then you would have a red-violet in the shadow. So there would be some red-violet dots. And then if the color of the light is yellow, like in the cloud, you could see you'd have yellow, a very high tint of yellow, and then you would have this ultramarine blue down in the shadow. So the tree would also need the yellow dots of the light, the color of the light. You would add the color of the light to the top. And then in the shadows, the greens would have ultramarine blue. So you would see both the complement of the light and the complement of the local color down in the shadows there. And so I think starting out with a pointillist painting, you would do something like this. You could sort of do an underpainting with yellow dots and blue dots, maybe different values, but that would get you going, would be like an underpainting. And so this is the beginning of a pointillist painting that I was doing from an architectural magazine, just from a photograph. But it's so intriguing and addictive, and you can see why this was so influential. Pizarro painted it, strictly with this technique for a while, but you absolutely lose your mind doing these little dots and building the thing up. It's just such a hard way, but to get to the final image. And so, I can't help but think that this has influenced how I see the colors and shadows, though. Because everywhere I try to use a color, the blue, to tie all the shades together, and the complements of the local colors. And so it's a thing, the way I do it and the way Monet probably did it would be to just throw everything in the kitchen sink in there and leave them unresolved. Don't blend too much, but leave the colors there. So, fascinating. Now, we're looking at this upside down. Doesn't really much matter, but there were 2 articles in Scientific American I used to have a subscription to that just blew my mind. One was by Edwin Land called The Retinex Theory of Color Vision. And I'm not going to try to explain this experiment, but it was just like you couldn't believe it. It was so interesting. You couldn't believe it because it was so counterintuitive. So, you haven't heard much about the Retinex theory of color vision, but there are a lot of wonderful neurobiologists who are studying vision, and they're making these discoveries hand over fist about how we see things. Now, this is just one case. Here is a photograph of a staircase in a modern setting, and if you can see this is a white wall, but it's in a shadow. So in any scene where you're painting white walls, you're going to have a whole lot of things from light gray to dark gray to black even, see? And when you take it out of a geometrical context and you're just looking at a small area, you say, oh, that's a sheet of black paper and a sheet of gray paper, see? So actually, your eye sees it. It's a matter of a computation that somehow, it has to figure out this is an edge created by a change in illumination, not by a change of reflectance, not by, And so when I saw that back in the 70s, I thought, oh, yeah, that explained a lot about the problems of realistic painting, of representing what you see. And a photograph like this, this is an unbelievable succession. You can see that the floor is darker than the wall, and the wall is darker than the ceiling. But every little change of, there's thousands of changes of reflectance. There are 3 changes of reflectance, but thousands of little changes of illumination depending on how the light changes there. So that's what I think is fascinating, and that's what get back to this. I think Monet is just so incredibly I never get tired of looking at his work, and there's so many paintings you never see that he's a guy who just painted absolutely everything he looked at. So, all right, I had this idea, that Cézanne had said that he wanted to redo Poussin from nature. So he was going to he was going to bring to Impressionism the order and the compositional clarity of Poussin's compositions. And yet he was going to do it with daylight and painting on location, sort of. Cézanne is one of my favorite painters too, but whatever he's doing towards the end in his late paintings, they're so spectacular. I don't think you can easily describe what he's doing. But if I thought of myself working on these pictures here and thinking about Impressionism, I thought of myself as attempting to redo Rembrandt with Monet and photography. And I don't know, you have to be a genius to redo anything about Rembrandt and probably Monet too, you know. So, but anyway, that is where I hope I'm headed. Okay.
Do most of your work in the fall? It seems like you have a very
These,
fall pictures.
yeah. You know, you remember in the group show, the Maine, the Painted State, I had a snow scene here. I've been struggling with snow scenes, and I've been looking. I painted the Hounds of Spring, which was one of these 8-foot paintings, which was spring because you could see all the dead leaves and you could see the new growth sprouting up everywhere. And so I've done summer, and then these are fall, you know, and I think because there's nothing I like more than a green tree that has started to turn, because you get that whole progression of color, you know, from green through the yellows to the whatever, the red or something. And so I have not been able to do a large snow scene. But that little painting that was in the last show, I think hey, I think I'm onto something there, because there's hardly any color, but it's different from this, you know, because they're all pretty much light colors too, and there's nothing to me more beautiful than to be out after heavy snowfall first thing in the morning. You know, you're walking around and before the branches have shaken off their snow covering, and it's incredible. So, yeah, Roy.
Do you find that your approach is changing? I mean, you sound like you have a very specific way of painting you have for a long time. I wonder if I'm seeing changes in the way that you're painting, maybe in this piece behind you at all, or I don't know if it was.
I think I'm trying things that I would never think of trying. You know, like I love Turner, and he oftentimes has the sun in the composition, in the painting. You know, and yet to really pull that off is it's just incredibly hard. But I really like the way this came out, and I'll tell you, one of the things that makes me like it was I saw in a Turner sketch that he made the lightest thing, which would be the disk of the sun, he made it dark, and that reminded me of reciprocity failure in photography. You know, where something gets, I mean, your eye has reciprocity failure too, because some of the sensors are more sensitive than others, and so as the light becomes very extreme, then the lightest thing actually looks a little bit darker, and so that gives the sun a kind of a different presence in this particular picture. And as I was planning to do this, I would have rays of light streaming out of all different colors as they pass through the sky. Well, that was too distracting, really, and it didn't look natural, you know, as if Seurat were painting this, I don't know what he would do. Would he just limit himself to blue and I don't know. But the thing about it is the way the sunlight streams down through the trees here. It's an effect, you know, you see, like if you're out fishing early in the mornings or something, you see shafts of light if there's the remnant of a fog, and it's just the most incredibly beautiful thing. Because in the woods, you're always seeing a pattern of leaves through another, you know, there are levels of transparency, and so the forest is just this, you know, very beautiful, penetrating transparency. And in this case, I love it you know, because I think there was a little residue of having gone up to Rangeley to see the eclipse, because I remember just sitting in my car. I didn't have any kind of a filter or anything, but I had a hat that had a hole in it, and so I was able to make a pinhole projection and see, you know, how much of a disc was gone or not, and then when it was near totality, then I was able to photograph with my camera without hurting my eyes, hopefully. But Yeah, this is very different from what I've done before, Roy. Related but different. Yeah. And the large one there, the it's as I began to work on it, I thought, I must have had 30 different photographs of that place, from this rock and a little bit closer and then a little farther away and then more background and less. And as I did the underpainting, I thought, oh my God, there's too much in this. It's just it's overwhelming. It's just never going to work. It's going to be a nightmare. And somehow it ended up being one of my favorite paintings. So I do think I'm experimenting, Roy, and doing things which I know I shouldn't be doing. And the underpainting really helped me a lot to figure out what the light is going to do. But it was like, it isn't like your eye just goes to one spot. Your eye keeps traveling around this. And afterwards I thought, even those twigs and things they're not distracting, but they sort of guide your eye to move in a certain way too. And so you keep circulating around the painting. And then I remembered from studying Chinese landscape painting, there was a Taoist idea about there being a dragon, what is it called? The dragon vein, which goes through the landscape, the natural landscape. And painters tried to have a dragon vein that would be a path of circulation through their paintings too. And I said, okay, that's what this does. It's a dragon vein. But I love how the shifts of perspective as you come around that corner in the light, and then at the very bottom, the water just sort of goes out the bottom. And it's interesting.
How long does it take to do a painting like what's behind you?
It takes 2 or 3 months anyway. And I'm lucky now I have a studio that's big enough I can hang paintings and look at them. And they can hang there for a while, then I can realize, this is what I have to do, because it isn't,
Do you go from one to the other?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. But it is interesting how even, like when you're painting these, you get sort of going into circles, and then okay, I'm stopping for the day. You come back the next day and you can see what's wrong and what you needed to do, and so you get to work. Now, I don't know why that is, but as we keep working in, then you somehow keep going in circles again. Then the next day, having some time away from it and a different thought pattern when you approach it, you can see it in a new way. And that's true with the big paintings too, and especially at very near the end, because then you sort of understand what the painting is all about. And sometimes you have to redo a whole area you've already done, just to say, okay, that's what the idea was, and so you can bring it out. But it's a kind of an act of faith. You got to start working on this thing. You don't know if it's going to be a disaster or not. So. But it's I don't know. I've painted so many pictures that I can sort of say, well, something will happen. Something good will happen. Yeah.
Do you leave things out sometimes and add things in on a
Pardon me?
Do you ever leave things out or add things in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that's where I admire people who take beautiful photographs, because yes, I add things, I take things out, I change the areas of light and shade and do all those things. And photographers, well, maybe you could say something about that, but in the age of Photoshop and AI and everything, photography doesn't have the same sort of sincerity. It's like you can add things just as easily, and everything is getting so automated. Like if you have a figure there, you want to take it out, there's a special app in Photoshop just for removing it, you know, and then AI takes over and fills in the spot that's missing. So I find it very interesting to do it and to learn a little bit, but it takes my brain. It takes a long time to learn a new thing in Photoshop, you know. But anyway, the neuroscience, I realized I'm not a scientist. You know, I'm an artist, and so I haven't really followed up on it. But Margaret Livingstone is a wonderful writer who I actually have met her. She came to the museum and gave us a talk, and she, I think she was in one of the early neurobiology labs at Harvard, you know, but she has a tremendous interest in art and perception, and so you might find her interesting, but she really knows her stuff too. There was a guy named Samir Zeki who was at the University of London, who was a neurobiologist, and there was a convocation of realist painters out in California that I said, okay, I'm going to go there because Franny's brother lives in Ventura. That's where this thing occurred. So we'll go visit them, and Samir Zeki was one of the speakers. So I know there are a lot of artists who are interested in all of this, all these new discoveries in visual perception. And Samir Zeki, he was really inspiring because I can't put my finger on why, but he's written about Michelangelo and all kinds of different things from his point of view. And eventually I sort of think, well, the neurobiologists want to explain everything about the human brain, you know, good luck to them. And I hope they don't. I hope they fail. But it's fascinating.
Do you work at this one tiny square and you go up? How do you?
Oh, the 5-inch squares?
Yeah. Do you go straight up? Do you go diagonal? How do you decide where to work on the painting?
It varies. It varies, but I usually don't do the thing I know is going to be the most important part of the painting, because every painting, first, you know, I don't, because every painting, as you work on it, takes on a life of its own and does something different, you know, and so I want to get warmed up before I come to that. So usually I start on the edge somewhere, something like that, but the underpaintings, you can look at the underpainting and then you can put a wash over a whole large area, you know, to darken the whole lower corner or something, you know, or wipe it out, or you can scumble very thinly a milky area, you know, so that helps to have these stages of development so that you can develop exactly what the theme and what's going on, what the dynamics of the picture are. So you can't see that in the beginning when you're looking at the photograph necessarily, because, you know, I want my paintings to look like paintings and not exactly like photographs. So I like brushwork, and I like working like this was a lot of working like painting something and then scuffing it with a knife, and then painting back into that and then scuffing that with a knife, so that, you know, it's tooled and worked in different things with all kinds of different brushes and stuff. So that's anyway, thank you so much for showing up and coming. It's great. Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions?
I don't know, Joel, how do you know when you're done?
Yeah, good question. I think of John Singer Sargent's his statement about how it takes two men to do a watercolor. one to do the painting and one to shoot him when it's done. So that's yeah, there's a point to that. But I've been learning that, this could be better if I just keep working on it more. And it's like, because I tend to like, when I started painting, if I couldn't finish a painting in a day, it was hard. It was a harsh. So I've learned to be more patient and see if it will go farther, if something will come out. So especially that painting, I have been up this summer 4 times on the Mount Washington Auto Road painting on a picture about about the size of these here, and it's like, wow, that view is so vast up there, and you're trying to do it. Now Turner, it could do it on a 4-inch watercolor and it would look vast. So I don't know what he's doing. But that one I worked and reworked, and I really like it now, even though it doesn't have the sense of vastness that the views that are 1,000 feet lower would have. But I changed the light on the mountains, and I put the foreground into a deeper shadow, and now I think, oh, it's really cool. It has a lot of feeling of being up there.